Good evening, students. Today we will be discussing a worldwide depression. Our essential question is, how did the economic depression in the United States spread and affect the rest of the world? Please take focus notes using the lecture to discuss how the depression in the United States spread to the rest of the world. And please summarize the question in a summary at the end of your notes. Thank you. Several new countries were created after World War I. Many of these countries became democracy. The fall of kingdoms and empires like Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire created new countries with people that had very little experience in representative government. These countries were used to being ruled by autocratic dictators, such as the Ottoman Sultan. Each of these countries or the Habsburg family, autocratic country. So there were many political parties. People that oftentimes they would have to form coalition governments, which were temporary multi-party alliances, and this created frequent changes in governments, which created a lot of instability. Inexperience and instability also led to people not trusting their government and not willing to follow their government, which is essentially a chicken and the egg scenario of what starts first: people's untrust in the government or people not willing to follow the government because they don't trust it. Probably the most infamous of all these new governments was the new German government known as the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was started in 1919 after the fall of the Kaiser. Now, the government had serious issues, most notably with the running of the economic system of Germany. Eventually, rather than paying off the war debts in money that they actually had or getting loans from other countries, they simply printed new money called the Deutschmark. This led to massive inflation, which drastically dropped the price and the value of the German currency. Attempts at economic stability came in the form of American loans, which eventually stopped the inflation and allowed the German economy to get back on proper footing. But again, major damage had been done to the German trust in the Weimar Republic because of their inability to deal with the inflation crisis. While dealing with the inflation crisis, Germany and France also signed a treaty that would pledge no more war between the two nations. This treaty would be called the Kellogg-Briand Treaty, essentially saying that the previous 40 years of possible warfare that existed between the two countries would stop. Another major issue that the Weimar Republic had to deal with was the loss of territory. The first and most important loss of territory was an area called the Rhineland. The Rhineland is the purple and the pink part of the map that we see to the left, and this was the major industrial center of the German country that would be occupied by French and British troops from here on out until 1936. The second most important part of territory that they suffered a loss to was an area called the Sudetenland, which would make up the western part of Czechoslovakia, as we see to the right of the German country. Once again, these territorial losses allowed the German people to feel like that the country of Germany was losing power and influence and prestige. After the inflation was over and once Germany secured loans from the United States government, everything sort of settled down in Germany and people were feeling a little bit more comfortable. That is until the financial collapse in the United States in the fall of 1929. Now, the United States economy was incredibly flawed. Majorly, this was caused by an uneven wealth distribution. Most people were too poor to buy goods that were produced by factories, which allowed for or made factories cut back on production and lay off workers. In turn, people became poorer and less likely to buy goods, which had a ripple effect. Now, farmers also began to produce more food than people could eat, which caused low prices. This was caused mainly by a increase in better farming production. Now, many of these poor people realized that some people were getting very wealthy, and that the way that many people were getting wealthy was through stock market or buying stocks. So as stocks were soaring, many people bought stocks on credit. Now, investors began to sell the stocks that people had bought on credit, and as they sold them, the prices became less. Now, those people who bought stocks on credit couldn't repay the debts because the stocks that they bought on credit were worth less than they originally bought them for. And on October 29th, 1929, the stock market collapsed and prices fell to basically nothing. And this set off a ripple effect that would eventually be referred to as the Great Depression. Now, the stock market collapse would turn into a massive economic downturn that we would eventually call the Great Depression, which was a long business slump basically throughout the entire 1930s. This was marked by bank failures, loss of savings, and high unemployment. Essentially, people would try to withdraw all their money out of the banks, but as banks would have loaned that money out to other people and people weren't able to pay back the loans, when people would try to get their money back, banks failed. This led to a global economic depression, as the American economic problems created problems in other countries, namely Germany, that was depending on the American economy being comfortable and healthy in order to pay loans that would allow their government to effectively function. World trade would fall sharply, and the effects would be felt throughout the world. Germany and Austria suffer greatly, as does Asia and Latin America. Eventually, the entire world would fall into a massive economic depression that would last at least for 10 years. Now, people were desperate to see a solution to the global economic crisis. Now, we'll start with England. They improved their economy by electing a coalition government, avoiding political extremes. They invested money back into the country and saw to create a slow, steady economic recovery. France, on the other hand, was 100% self-sufficient for the most part, and therefore they were able to continue to keep their government intact because of their economy did not rely that much on global trade, and so therefore they were able to be successful. Now, many governments relied on socialist government systems in order to help out their governments. One such example were the Scandinavian countries such as Norway and Sweden that relied on huge public works programs. The United States also took a lot of these public works programs and brought them here into something that was called the New Deal, created by then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The New Deal would create programs to put people back to work and to improve the economy. One famous example of a New Deal program was the building of the Tower Bridge in downtown Sacramento, which employed people from the area and allowing them to earn a wage, pay taxes, and eventually improve the economy. Other countries like Italy, Germany, and Spain would go an entirely different way with an entirely different political identity that would be known as fascism, that we will discuss in our next lecture. Thank you for watching. Please answer the essential question: how did an economic depression in the United States spread and affect the rest of the world? As a summary for your notes, and we will discuss this at the beginning of the period tomorrow. Thank you very much. Goodbye.